paradigm is a frame, and one of the frames that's self-evident in this exchange is the frame. The frame. This interaction is taking place within a frame. And it's important to understand that all human consciousness occurs within a frame. And the frame has limits, has boundaries. And what exists outside the frame does not exist for the conscious mind that's looking within a frame. And if you think of the conscious mind as occupying or engaging with reality through the frame of sensory perception, we know, for example, that there is a whole world that exists that is not real to the human eye, but becomes real through the technology of the microscope. The microscope is a frame that allows us to take this frame, visual perception, combined with the frame of the microscope, the amplification of visual data, to see a wider frame. And so what this discussion explores is a paradigm of paradigm, a frame of frames. And it's useful as a unifying principle or as a unifying theory because it has room, and this is one of the ways to measure the usefulness of a frame, is how much data needs to be excluded. Because if you have a frame of reference to engage with reality that requires you to exclude most of reality in order to engage with reality, it's not as useful a frame as a frame that allows you to include more reality when it's useful. More reality when it's useful. And what I mean by that is the frame is useful as a focusing mechanism. And so part of what we have to decide as human beings on a daily basis is how tight to set the zoom. Because we can do this entire video based on details in this finger, blurry or otherwise. We can focus in and really understand this finger. We can just focus on the body. We can focus on the ideas. We can focus on our feelings. We can focus on projecting our feelings. So there's a tremendous amount of zooming in and focusing. And this requires a paradigm for intelligence. Because how do you decide whether to watch this frame of frames or something else? And I'd suggest that one way to decide is the paradigm of intelligence. And intelligence within this paradigm of intelligence can be measured by the efficiency with which time, money, and natural resources is transformed into human well-being. Every human being on the history of humanity has wanted to feel sustainably good and better still. We want to grow. We want to become. We want to self-actualize so that sustainable human well-being can increase. We're not doing this to cause long-term chronic suffering for ourselves and those we care about, unless we've got suffering and well-being cross-wired, something that happens in early childhood abuse patterns. Now, simultaneously, every human being in the history of humanity has wanted to avoid feeling chronically bad and worse. So, as a general rule, some part of you believes that whatever it is you're doing or not doing right now will ultimately lead to feeling sustainably better and will help you avoid feeling chronically bad. Now, if we understand that that's an innate drive, and if we understand that we're part of an ecological universe, a universe of interconnectivity, where no energy is created or destroyed, it's simply transformed. When I die, we know what happens to the body within a materialistic framework, within a materialistic paradigm. We know what happens to the body. Dig a hole in the ground, lay my body into the ground, the blood gets absorbed as nitrogen in the surrounding plants. Hopefully, there are still plants growing on the planet. And the body, all of the energy stored in this body, is released into the surrounding ecology. It doesn't just get destroyed. But this body becomes the energy that fuels plants, that fuels microorganisms, that fuels bacteria, and life continues. And we're a part of that. This is a 5 billion plus year program of creating life. And if there's any trust in that process, and one of the things that we can see happening on just our little tiny version of reality on the planet, is we can see that complexity blossoms under nature's protocol. That nature creates one thing and then has sex with it and creates another thing and then has sex with that and creates another thing. And one of the things that we see in an evolutionary process is that as one thing has sex with another thing, has sex with another thing, and combines, first of all, you get variety, you get diversity, you get complexity, and you get anomaly. And how does nature select? How does nature select which of the anomalies, which of the varieties go forth and which implode and are consumed in the joyful expression of intelligence? It is the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. And what I mean by that is if you have two lions on a savanna getting hungry, and one of the lions has better lungs. One of the lions, because they have better lungs, gets more oxygen to their muscles. One of the lions, because they have better lungs, because there's more oxygen to the muscle, runs more and is more fit. And one of the lions does not. When any time you have two in a polarity, they're never identical. And all things being equal, this is a very, very simple model of reality, the fitter, faster lion is going to get the first catch. When the lions go hunting, the fitter lion, the healthier lion, the more intelligent, if we measure the efficiency of turning energy into human well-being, is going to have to spend less energy, less effort to get more done. As a result, he's going to be well fed, which will mean that he can rest and stay healthier, can continue the exercise regime with the stronger lungs. Now, what nature says in its expression of life is that we want excellence, we want evolution, we want growth, we want healthier, dynamic, complex, more symmetrical entities to exist. And so in the selection process, the anomaly that converts energy, time, money, and natural resources for human beings, natural resources and time and energy for a lion, into sustainable well-being, into here's the carcass of a zebra to consume, So we've transformed energy, the plotting, the identification of food, the leap forward, the capture, and the consumption of energy. That species, that individual will go forward. Now we have a very interesting pivot point. You can kind of imagine it as an upward pyramid and then an inverted pyramid. There's an interesting changing of gears. You probably know in a gearbox in a car, when you're going from first gear into second gear, there's a clutch process. And you switch to what could be called a different operating system. So the one operating system is maybe 32 teeth on a wheel, and the second operating system might be 15 teeth on a wheel. And what that means is that if they're engaging with the same revolution of motor, is that you can go faster. You can go faster, but only after you get up speed and momentum to shift gears. You can't start a car in fourth gear, and you can't start human consciousness in fourth gear. You have to shift up, so to speak, over time. And the first gear in human consciousness, as human consciousness moves from the human animal into the human being, is the reptilian and then the mammalian brain. So we have the reptilian and the limbic mammalian brain, which are not very conscious, and they are sociopathic by nature, meaning the lion in this dynamic exchange, the lion is attacking the sickest, smallest, oldest zebra. So we've already seen that the lion that's fittest with the best lung, etc., is going to make the kill first, statistically speaking, which will create a virtuous or a vicious circle, depending on which paradigm you're using to evaluate the process, whereby nature will continue to create and fund excellence. The excellent lion will survive and breed, creating more excellent lions. And the excellent zebra will be the last to get caught. And within a sociopathic paradigm, the excellent zebra will be the last to get caught. And the excellent lion will be the first to catch. And the sickest zebra will be the first to be caught. And in this way, the zebra herd gets excellent, and the lion herd gets excellent. So we're training for excellence. We're training for intelligence, the efficiency with which energy, time, money, and natural resources is transformed into well-being. In the well-being of a lion, human intelligence relates to human well-being. Now, there's obviously, if we're at all moral or have studied religious texts, we understand this doesn't sound very right. Do you mean to say that the little old lady zebra is the first to be attacked, is killed? You know, that bloodthirsty lion, doesn't he have any respect for the old ladies? Why doesn't he go after the alpha zebra? Well, first of all, logistically, it takes a lot more energy to attack an alpha zebra than it does to attack a zebra that's limping, behind the rest of the pack, etc. And so from a sociopathic point of view, using the reptilian brain, you do what's easiest and expedient to convert energy into well-being. And so that dictates preying on the weak, the sick, the young, the old, the less developed. You seize on them and kill them. And the result is faster energy for the predator and a weaning and strengthening of the zebra pack. So this is nature's reptilian program, and its first gear in human consciousness. And if you look around the world today in reptilian capitalism, reptilian politics, reptilian relationships, rape culture, abuse of children, what we see is first gear. We see the sociopathic reptilian program in effect. Someone needs to be the scapegoat in a dysfunctional system. Let's take the person who's a little bit different, who doesn't have friends, and throw them out. Why? Because it's easier to throw them out than it is to throw out the alpha who has, let's say, a lot of money to protest the issues. So it's easier to attack the lowest person on the pecking order is often a good way to see it in a sociopathic framework. So the schools, the prep and boarding schools of the British aristocracy, for example, they had a system of fagging, was what it was called. And one of the reasons that gays are called fags in a derogatory term is that in an all-boys school, one of the requirements of the most sensitive, vulnerable, and younger applicants to these schools would be asked to perform fellatio and sexual favors for the alphas in the school in a system called fagging. But it wasn't just sexual enslavement and sexual dominance and all of that. It was bullying. It was a condescension protocol that meant that the stronger you were, the higher in rank you were, the more everyone tried to serve you. And so this was based off of the paradigm in British aristocracy that the king was the one who could exploit the peasants. The goal of a king was not to serve, in a sociopathic paradigm, the most vulnerable of their people. The goal of the king was to tax, to exhaust, to intimidate, to behead all political opposition, to attack the weak, to intimidate and terrify the weak. Because in a sociopathic paradigm of fight, flight, and freeze, what you do is you fight those that are smaller than you, because then you win. You freeze if you can either fight or run. You just freeze. And you run from those that are bigger than you, because in a sociopathic reality, those that are bigger than you will kill you, use you, exploit you if they enter the field. So you have a fight, flight, freeze dynamic. Now, the brutality of the British elite sending their vulnerable 6-year-old boys to boarding school, what they're trying to raise are sociopathic power figures who understand a hierarchical sense of sociopathic power. And then having entered that system, because no matter how terrified and lonely and homesick these boys were, they couldn't leave the school. They would be whipped for not being a man, for not accepting the sociopathic dominance hierarchy being blasted into their biology, into their psyche, as evidenced by the fact that if they cried in the circle, they would be humiliated for the act of expressing the grief of the human parts of the brain. Because you have the reptile, which predates on the weak, the small, but then you have the human part of the being. See, and this is where, the human being goes from first gear of reptilian, sociopathic, unconscious, no feeling, into feeling, into anger, rage, pleasure, this just instinctual and reactive. This feels good, I'm going to do this. This feels bad, get away from it. So you have reactive emotions. But then you have reason. Now we're getting into third gear for the human consciousness. So we have first gear, reptilian, second gear, limbic. Third gear is rational pattern analyzing. through the lens of the reptile and the animal. Oh, if I wait for this woman to walk down this street, I can rape her and nobody will be around. So I'm not just going to act on the most expedient time. I want to have sex, there's a female, rape her. It makes perfect sense to an expedient reptile. But to the analytical expedient reptile, you have pattern analyzing, you have logic and reason, you have calculation. And so you pick strategically the most vulnerable point in the system to attack there because because it's more intelligent. It's called delayed gratification. And if you will delay gratification and pick your opportune moment, you can make a killing. The Rockefellers in other wealthy families, for example, very carefully organized their investments so that they could sell off, and this is where information comes in. Because if you can know that war is starting before everyone else knows, you quickly liquidate, because this is going to create a crash, right? And of course, you're a part of the crash because the more people liquidate, the more there's a sell. So in sociopathic systems and paradigms, you're dealing with reptilian analysts that in the most extreme cases are actually setting up disasters so that they can profit from them. And this makes perfect sense in gear number 1, gear number 2, and gear number 3 in human consciousness. These are the gears of ascendancy. We're moving up towards optimal speed, which, as you know, in a car, it's 4th or 5th gear on a freeway, going 75 miles an hour or whatever. That's, at 3,000 RPM. That's where you really take off in terms of intelligence, because you have the most return on investment at those speeds in that gear. 4th and 5th gear, cruising along a freeway, 75 miles an hour, you're converting time, money, and energy more efficiently to the goal, getting to a desired destination, up at that speed than you are down in first gear. And that's really the problem with reptilian driven thinking, is you're in first gear. You can never experience the exponential grace of driving 75 miles an hour in first gear. It just doesn't happen. It never has happened. It's never going to happen. If you push too hard in first gear, you burn up the engine. It doesn't work. So you've got up to, reptilian thinking. So you've got a sophisticated maneuvering process. And one of the reasons that quants right now in the financial markets will pool together resources to lay their own fiber optic cable from London to New York. It's one of the things in arbitrage is the markets, how a stock trades in London, let's say Tesla on the London Stock Exchange versus Tesla on the US Stock Exchange, how a stock exchanges in one exchange versus another. There's a slight discrepancy. And if you can get the information about that discrepancy before anyone else, you could sell stock in New York and buy it in London. And these are no-risk trades. Another example is someone who bought up, I think it was several million nickels, several $1 million of nickels. And what he found in this arbitrage experiment is that it cost the U.S. Mint to make in silver, which is used in nickels, it cost them more silver. Silver was trading for more money than the cost of the nickel. So what he could do was take delivery of a few $1 million of nickels, melt them all down into silver, and then sell the silver for more than the price. And so you've got an instant arbitrage opportunity. And this, of course, happens due to the lethargy. No market is 100% efficient. So you've got a lethargy of, we're making nickels at the U.S. Mint for more money than the cost of a nickel. Well, that's, of course, costing the taxpayer. But do we really want to address this insanity and make a new coin or bring it up? Oh, we're too busy. So it creates these arbitrage opportunities. And this is one of the constructive aspects. You see that in the predatory zebra paradigm, if the zebra pack is getting too lazy, too inefficient, doesn't develop and evolve, basically, that a lion's going to decimate the entire pack. And so will other predators. And so if you're dealing with a reptilian mindset, which is a fight, flight, freeze, fawn program, and fawn comes in human cultures and sometimes in animal cultures, it's called kissing. And that's where you have, for example, in a whale dynamic, there are certain, I think they're called pilot fishes, and they clean the teeth of the whale, and so the whale won't eat them, right? And in the fagging system in Britain, which was used to raise sociopathic leaders, who would understand by the time they were in Parliament or were king that they were expected to hurt the poorest of the poor the most. Then there would be a ranking system, and then in the Lords and royalty program, you treat the people who need treating well the best. You treat the people who don't need it the best. And this is, of course, how the banking system works to this day, where if you really need a loan, because you just, had a $200,000 medical bill, your car broke down, your husband got fired because the company moved 10,000 jobs over to China to save a nickel a day or whatever it was. And so you really need a loan because you're grieving all of that, and the last thing you need is to lose your house. Well, you go into a bank when you really need a loan, and they say, basically, you really need a loan, so we're not going to give you a loan. Why? I didn't come into a loan before because I didn't need a loan. Yes, but what you need to do, because we are a sociopathic institution, is you need to come in and get a loan when you don't need a loan, because those are the only people we loan money to. And why? Well, because the people who really need a loan statistically don't pay the loans back as quickly and reliably as the people who don't need a loan and have plenty of money. Oh, I see. So if I didn't need a loan and had plenty of money, so I didn't need a loan, then you would give me a loan. And they're like, yes, you've got it. Bravo. You've learned the first law in reptilian capitalist culture. We help those who don't need help, and we prey on people who need help the most. Because, by the way, now that we know that you're in this desperate situation, we're going to foreclose on your house. And so this is why you can see in sociopathic systems, it leads to secrecy. And it's one of the things that I want to lead into here, because when you have secrecy, because transparency is punished, when you have secrecy, you do not get an accurate equation. If your teacher gives you a mathematical equation and says, solve this equation, and one of the sets of figures is crossed out, or let's say 2 or 3 of them are crossed, you can't solve the equation because you don't have transparency. You don't have the data to solve the equation. And so the climbing of the gears in kind of nature's hierarchy of evolution gets to this point where you have rational, competent sociopathic behavior. So in political systems, in market capitalism, in bullying dynamics, in parental dynamics. It doesn't matter if you are correct, if your parents really are abusive hypocrites. If you're 5 years old and weigh 30, 40 pounds, and your parents weigh 200 pounds and control your money, your legal status, etc., what exactly does the child do? They speak up about it, of course. First they cry. As they become more literate, they speak out about the obvious hypocrisy. They get whacked in the face. They shut up. They learn that a bully can punish you more for speaking than you could otherwise. So you're dealing with a reptilian paradigm. Now, in reptilian paradigms, mass is the dominant law. Whoever is the biggest, the strongest, the most powerful, the highest ranking, gets to have the opportunity of preying on whoever is smallest, weakest, etc. And so you have this on all levels of hierarchical power structures. 500 years ago, even today, in various places. Like, what would Harvey Weinstein do when he wanted a new sexual victim? He'd spot someone that he had some lust towards. He'd tell one assistant to get this note and set to this. Then he'd tell another assistant to book this and this. Then he'd show up with power and say, I can benefit your life, but you have to come to my bedroom. You don't want to have a dramatically improved life? Fine. We won't meet in my hotel room. But if you want the opportunity to have me as your friend, come to my hotel room. And then once you're there, you've got to give me a massage. And then once you got to do, and don't make me your enemy. I'll hire the Israeli security force to harass and ruin your life, right? So you have this power dynamic. And of course, kings, not too long ago, would just be driving by and say, I'm going to add your daughter to my harem. No different, a little bit more direct, a little bit more honest, but sociopathic, reptilian nonetheless. Obviously, the 12-year-old girl, the 15-year-old girl has, and what is she told by her parents? Do what the king says. Do what the king says. Why? Because in a reptilian system, the goal is, of course, in a reptilian system, is to seek favor from the powerful. Because the powerful might throw you a few crumbs. Because it can't be completely, if everyone is 100% certain that they will be preyed upon and their life will be significantly more miserable because of the existence of this monarch or this leader, then the power always lies in the majority. Any one of them could pull out a knife and slash the throat at the time, and this is how revolution takes place in a sociopathic or a Klingon world. In the sociopathic world of Klingons and Star Trek, you gain ascendancy. You're not even considered a worthy leader unless you murder your captain. And that's how you gain a starship. And in corrupt political systems, you silence the people who bore witness against your crimes. The typical cover-up, if you read the Clinton Chronicles, you can see the number of dead bodies and silenced individuals in the wake of the Clintons. It's not much different in the wake of Donald Trump. You have a system of abusive power and dominance to maintain the alpha position, which is always male. But in a case like Margaret Thatcher in England, it can be a very masculine female, a sociopathic masculine female who is more sociopathic and more masculine than many men can rise to power in a sociopathic system. And it's very important to understand that as long as the majority of people operate from a fight, flight, freeze, fawn system, they will elect sociopaths because that's what makes sense. If you're a sociopath, first of all, you're in fear. You're highly traumatized and you're in fear. I think most of our population. And in that dynamic of trauma and fear, you don't want your alpha to be weak. Now, what weak means in a sociopathic paradigm is that you got outsmarted, you didn't go for the kill. So in a gang or in a war, weakness is you didn't kill the person when they were vulnerable. That's what weakness is. Because if you don't kill the crocodile that's coming for you when you have the chance, the crocodile does not forgive or honor your benevolence. If you don't kill the crocodile when the crocodile is gunning for your child, for your family, the crocodile will kill you. So this is where dogs actually don't eat each other, but this is where we get this, absurdity of the dog-eat-dog world. Kill or be killed. That's the dynamic of two crocodiles. And that's the dynamic of two human beings locked in trauma in the reptilian brain in first gear. And the most dangerous human beings are reptiles with a high degree of social veneer, because a very sophisticated reptile understands that most people around them will not trust them if they know they will be killed or discarded. So a sophisticated reptile has to adopt a veneer. This is the highest level of evolution in the sociopathic reptilian paradigm. Crocodiles can't do this. Crocodiles can't pretend that they really love your kid and just want to hang out for a little bit, and they can't pull it off. They're not that sophisticated. It takes reptilian, limbic, pattern analyzing. And see, the sociopath with a pattern analyzing capacity has the ability to mirror and mimic, just like the most scary monsters in AI. They're not scary. They're women. If you look at Ex Machina and these types of horror movies around AI, the most ruthless and dangerous sociopath comes in the mask of the desired empathy or the desired feminine. And so, this machine, and it is a machine because it's got a program. It's got a program, and there's not a lot of space between stimulus and response. And this is something Stephen Covey covered a little bit in 7 Habits, is that the degree of freedom, the degree of humanity that exists in a human being lies in the gap between stimulus and response. You see, if you've got a very, very long, sophisticated conscious code that exists in that gap of stimulus and response, you may just be a human being. Now, we don't get to fourth gear until we deal with empathy. So empathy comes in with the mirror neurons of the brain, and empathy says that, when my landlord kicked me out on the street, as soon as I developed a drug problem. So, here's the chain of events. I got pregnant because my boyfriend refused to use a condom. When I told my boyfriend that I was pregnant, he hit me, and I called the police. And then the police didn't do anything, and my boyfriend dumped me. Right at the point where he had promised he would take care of me in between this and this, and would, So I had no ability to pay rent. And so I told my landlord, and he kicked me out as soon as he understood that I wouldn't have any rent. And so, and I felt overwhelmed, and as tends to be the case in these abuse spirals, of course, I had no family to turn to, because if I had a father that really knew how to understand and stick up for a daughter who was abused by the father, of course, I wouldn't have felt okay picking such an abusive man. I defaulted to a male figure who had characteristics of my father because my father said he loved me and did these things, and my partner said he loved me and did these same things, and so it kind of made sense. It made sense. In a culture that doesn't educate its children about emotional literacy, traumatic literacy, about abuse dynamics at home, how would I recognize them? It's all been called love, masked over. Okay, so in this dynamic, I'm now, out on the street. And so this is, this is all clear reptilian thinking. But if I am now a landlord, because I went through all that, and I can recognize in this woman here, she's terrified. I remember what that felt like. And I, of course, understand that a terrified, preyed upon woman in this cult is not a good bet financially. So the reptile in me says now's the chance to get rid of her, raise the rent, and then bring in a new tenant. But the human part in me, the empathic part in me, says, this doesn't feel very good. The empathic part says, I've got a lot more than you. Why don't you stay rent-free for 3 months? And I know it's tough, and I'm sorry that I can't, in a sociopathic environment, my bank isn't going to help me because I'm helping you. You see, I will be punished. You see, because my bank is going to look at my savings and see that they're down because you didn't pay rent. And so my bank is going to downgrade my credit risk, which makes me more vulnerable to be preyed upon by reptiles in a reptilian cult. And so I'm only going to help you for 3 months. But for 3 months, I'll be a human being. And then I'll kick you out like a reptile and demand that regardless of what's going on in your life and what you actually need, you're going to have to fend for yourself as a single mother in this cult. So, but the ability to do that, to intervene and interrupt the reptilian program, is the empathic brain through the mirror neurons. Now, this is fourth gear. Now, it's why is it fourth gear? On a mathematical level, fourth gear is, of course, a much higher return on investment. You get there faster with less energy in fourth gear. So it's evolution. Now, what else is going on in fourth gear, though? You look at the problem that we create with our millions of homeless. We do the same types of things, and then we discard more than $1 trillion a year in our economy by creating people who feed on the system rather than contribute the system. We create them by being sociopathic. There is a certain level of abuse and sociopathic brutality that decimates a human being's ability to function at a high level in this cult. And when we unload that degree of cruelty, layer by layer by layer by layer, punishing the victim for the symptoms of being punished, and then punishing them again for talking about the symptoms of being punished, we are unloading a level of hatred and cruelty on the empathic regions of the brain that it's like ice. It's like melting the humanity, or it's freezing the humanity, and locking it up. So what's left is a terrified reptile with PTSD in tremendous amounts of grief who can't function. We produce these people every single day systematically. And it is an act of profound ignorance. It's an act of profound cruelty from a visionary point of view, which we don't yet have with the sociopathic pattern recognition system. You don't have vision of your country. But if you have national vision, obviously you understand that for every single human being you abuse, and then abuse for demonstrating the symptoms of abuse, and then abuse for talking about the symptoms of the abuse, and then abuse for being angry at being shut up for talking about the symptoms of abuse, and then abuse when they become an addict to numb the pain, and then shame for revealing the addiction. If you follow that thread mathematically, you see that we are a cult committed to turning a percentage of our individuals in a downward spiral into hell for all concerned, because all human states are viral in nature. Poverty begets poverty. Cruelty begets cruelty. Violence begets violence. And what this is, it's a violation of the human capacity to empathize and feel. It's a violation of the potential of a human being, of a spiritual being in a human body, to be downgraded into a reptile, go back 200 million years old, because we're too fucked up to know that we're too fucked up, and we hate ourselves too much to do anything about it. And we're going to download all that ignorance and stupidity onto you, and then you're going to play a part in rippling out and pulling down 10, 20 people around you. When one person commits suicide to escape the bottleneck of this amount of torture, for example, various people get pulled down into that vortex. So it's not intelligent. If we go back to the definition of intelligent, the efficiency with which we turn time, money, and natural resources into human well-being, it is not intelligent to go from fourth gear, fifth gear back into the reptilian state. But we do it all the time, because a sociopathic environment, culturally, financially, politically, produces sociopaths needed to survive a sociopathic environment. If you're surrounded by crocodiles, don't be compassionate. Get the fuck out of there whatever way you can. You've got to become a reptile and think like a reptile to escape the predation of reptiles. But the trouble is, will you ever release your consciousness to be more than a reptile after you got out? That's the big question. And it's unknown. PTSD, for example, captures people into their deepest painful, abusive moments, and they find themselves locked into a reptilian loop where their brain is telling you, you are surrounded by reptiles. It's not safe to love. It's not safe to care. You will be killed for being a human being. And this is the scream of the reptilian brain, who has been battered by their country, their culture, their family too many times for too long. There's the load, there's an abuse load of cruelty at which the empathic brain shuts down, and the person regresses 200 million years to become a sociopathic instinctive reptile. And that's what we get to live with. When we regress people into instinctive reptiles, we get to live among instinctive reptiles. That's the price for being a dick, for being an asshole. And the prize for helping someone escape a reptilian environment inside and out and feel safe and secure in the empathic part of the brain is we get to be with a human being. A human being who knows that they're loved, who knows that they're valuable, and behaves as if and tremendously contributes to the cult, to the culture. So this is the reward. That's the reward from going from third into fourth gear. And it's a delicate thing, because as you can see, as we start to enter this fourth gear of human consciousness, it's the antithesis of the reptilian brain. That which will create the greatest exponential wealth for the species, empathy based on intelligence and competency, is what will get you killed in a circle of crocodiles. So you can also see the problem with the lowest common denominator. 100 monks chanting in a circle, empathic brain, right? Maybe even transcendent brain, fifth gear. One pulls out a gun, shoots out the roof of the temple, says, "On your knees, fuckers, or I'm going to mow you down." How many of those monks, certainly not the Western Buddhists that are busily trying to escape their anxiety, how many of those monks are going to be able to maintain the grace and serenity of empathy and be more concerned for the reptile who's been reduced and imprisoned in their reptilian brain than they are concerned for how to kill the person with the gun? You see, because it's a delicate balance, it's a delicate state. But the person with the gun is the sickest person in the circle. They're the one infected with fear. They're the one using a 200 million year old reptilian operating system. They're the one who doesn't know how to create safety for themselves or others and meet their needs on an empathic level. And it's one of the reasons that violence is a virus and spreads. You see, because if your daughter is being raped and imprisoned in a sex gang, and you care about that daughter more than anyone else, and you let people know, and they all say, we're busy, we're sorry, we're not going to help you, what you learn is that you're surrounded by reptiles. What you learn is that your deepest pain and grief is not a priority for anyone. Maybe the police don't go in there because they don't want to face off on that gang. Too many police people are dead when they come out of that neighborhood, so they don't look. They don't go in there. Now, if you put your daughter ahead of all other things and no one else is, you're going to have to command resources for your daughter using fear, because love is not working. Empathy is not working. And that's when the empath becomes a sociopath in order to pursue an empathic goal. The goal is to get their daughter out of the sex gang. They're in a circle of reptiles, of people who will not take a risk to protect that child. This is a circle of children who don't understand kingship, who don't understand queenship, who don't understand leadership, who don't understand what it is to be an adult. The true archetype of the adult is the one who loves and makes it their business to care for the least in the psyche, the least in their family, and then the least in those around them. So it's the antithesis of the reptilian program. And it's an interesting dynamic in the evolution of mythology, which follows these brain paradigm shifts, that in the ancient texts and the ancient mythologies, the snake was the god. By the time you come to like King George and the dragon, what you had before King George or Saint Michael, there's a very important Christian peripheral myth of the slaying of the reptile. So the dragon is the reptilian brain. It has a positive and negative expression. It tends to be more positive in China. It doesn't tend to have a positive expression in the West. But the dragon is the reptile. It is the traumatic, overwhelming reptile because a dragon is bigger than human consciousness. And so the dragon is metaphorically portrayed in the myth as being, 20 times bigger than a human being. So it takes a lot of work to kill a dragon. But the slaying of the dragon by King George inverted the program because, and this is the formation of the Michaelmas tradition in Christianity. So Michaelmas is Saint Michael slaying the dragon. Of course, the British wanted to pretend that their kings were saintly, so let's call him King George. But it's a masculine energy that slays the reptile, which of course exists inside and out, we're talking about conquering the sociopathic reptilian brain to move into a Christian era, because the Christian era is defined by a new kind of leader, What does Christ do that is most significant in this paradigm? He washes the feet of his disciples. You see, the old kings, the reptilian brain, the fagging system, the capitalist system has the students, has the feminine, has the recruits, has the citizens, has the poor wash the feet of the king. Simon Sinek, in his recent book, Leaders Eat Last, the new paradigm of leadership is that the king, the Christ, washes the feet of the disciples. That the Father takes care of the most vulnerable member of his family, rather than exploits, incestuously abuses, and otherwise. That the Father provides and takes care of the mother, rather than beating her without any recourse to take care of him. So there's a movement where the masculine energy goes from exploiting the feminine energy as a reptilian brain to serving and honoring the feminine. And it was King George or St. Michael that, Michael was the right hand of God, Christ the Son, whatever, that reversed this. Because remember in the mythology, what did the dragon demand as payment to not destroy the village? So the myth goes basically that there was a village. There's always a village. And in the village, a dragon moved into the terrain, the alpha reptilian masculine abuser. It feels very big, so make it into a dragon. Everyone's terrified of it. Fire, right? Everyone's terrified of the reptilian masculine abuser. What does the abuser demand? A certain amount of the tax, right? This is the gang leader, the president. Tax on pain of death. You have to give me a certain amount of your crops, a certain amount of your money, so that I get fat, and I'm going to sit on more money than I know what to do with. I'm going to gild, I'm going to create the Louvre. I'm going to gild the French, palaces with gold-plated toilets, while the peasants slave away in poverty because I'm a reptile, right? So a dragon moves in, and he demands a fresh virgin. We're talking about the innocence of the feminine. Now, of course, a dragon can't have sex with a virgin. He just wants to eat her, wanted to destroy that. So the reptilian energy tries to take more of what it can't use. Why? The reptile can't feel. A snake cannot feel, it cannot utilize, it cannot love and be loved. So it can go over and say, they all want that. They think this is the most beautiful woman. I'm going to take her. That's the dragon inside. They have gold and stuff. I want that. I'm a dragon. What can I do with gold? Nothing. I'm a reptile. But I'm going to have it. No one's going to have anything that I don't have, right? So you have the competitive, manipulative, sociopathic reptile. I'm going to get more, right? The endless greed, the insatiable greed, in the Lord of the Rings, Smaug, the sitting on the pile of gold, sitting there, just as long as no one else has it. So this is the reptilian energy, and you can see it's not very intelligent, is it? If the dragon instead let all the communities have all that gold, and they made the land plentiful, the dragon could have food delivered daily to the cave, and there would be plenty to spare. But in that hoarding dynamic, it's a scarcity dynamic that creates a scarcity dynamic. So St. George or St. Michael or Angel Michael, Archangel Michael, whatever the figurehead is, was the one who came down and did battle with the dragon. And this is the pivoting point in human consciousness. They did battle with the dragon. Why? To protect the virgin. Because what the villagers do with the innocent one and with the feminine one is they appease the alpha. They appease, okay, you need my second daughter, you need this, just don't hurt the rest of us. We'll give you our children, just don't hurt us. So trauma reduces people to a reptilian state. It's not that the daughter wants to be eaten by a dragon. No, she protests and begs her parents, don't feed me to the dragon. Every child weeps bitterly as their parents go off to a workplace that often destroys the family system. Every child weeps bitterly, don't throw me to the dragon. Don't send me to the bullies at school. Parents say, we're sorry, we know it's tough. This is a fucked up culture. But you've got to deal with it. We're not going to protect you. We're not going to change the system. So this is something new for Archangel Michael to come in and actually kill the dragon, so that they didn't have to, in the village, give the feminine, give the innocent virgin up to the dragon. It's a seminal moment. It's a key. We're talking about a shift where the strongest alligator slays the dragon rather than appeases the dragon or gangs up with the dragon. Because what do capitalist billionaires get together on a sociopathic level? They figure out how to manipulate the market. Is called, pumping, right? So what billionaires like to do with each other, there's a couple of whales get together, a couple of dragons get together, and they pump the market. And it's similar to price fixing. It's illegal, but how can you stop a couple of billionaires having a cigar surrounded by security guards, getting another couple of billion, by flooding a market, pushing the stock up, letting everyone know that they're in it, pulling it out. And if you do it carefully and have some friends playing roles for you, you can get away with it. And now you've got, what, another 200 million? Now, who lost money? The inexperienced traders. And they're called suckers. Because a reptile doesn't have empathy. A reptile doesn't say, gosh, we just destroyed 2,000 retirement funds for money we don't need. A dragon hoards and, fuck everyone else. I want more for me. I don't need it. But I want to be number one dragon, right? And of course, the Forbes 500, the Fortune 400, these lists measure the king dragon, right? And of course, you see a certain level of transformation as Gates and Buffett, big whales in a sociopathic dynamic. Because how does Buffett make his money? He likes monopolies. Microsoft was an illegal monopoly, right? Bullying other companies out of the way. So Microsoft, in its heyday, and before the antitrust, a complete and utter bully, an 800-pound gorilla is how the market would refer to Microsoft. Same with Oracle. PeopleSoft just knocked out of business out of sheer malice and bullying. We are bigger than you. It doesn't matter if you're better than us. We are going to destroy you. So this is capitalism at its finest, right? Destroying superior technologies, wiping people out of work so that money can make more money for people who don't need it. Now, as Buffett and Gates become altruistic, using reptilian sociopathic thinking, people comment about Gates looking a bit like a lizard at times, but that analytical thinking can run from reptilian instinct, fight, flight, freeze, or it can run from empathy. Imagine what it's like to be this. You've got an analyzer, and the analyzer is neutral. With that analysis can come any number of things, positive or negative. So the trend towards asking billionaires to commit half of their money by the time to give away to charity and the Gates Foundation is a classic example of the inversion process. And it's hard to know, if you're going to be a reptile for the first 40 or 50 years of your life and then you become an empath for the last 20 years. Obviously, the same was true with John D. Rockefeller. He was losing all of his hair, was pacing constantly, he was endlessly addicted to money and stuff with Standard Oil, and founding the Rockefeller, fortune. And in that endless addiction, it was driving him mad. Absolutely driving him mad. And so he didn't start to feel healthy. He didn't stop losing his hair and enjoy his life until he started the foundation. You're moving into the other part of the brain, empathy. So empathy offers an entirely new world view because in an empathic operating system, the lion doesn't prey on the oldest zebra. He helps her across the street. And you don't feed your children to a dragon. You protect your children with your life because you're bigger and you're stronger. Leaders eat last. So the world that opens up when you have a group of leaders and adults who behave this way is you raise a generation of human beings who are not reptiles. And the reptilian brain creates a reptilian environment which creates reptilian people. So when you create a whole generation of people who feel empathy towards other people because they were raised in an empathic environment that honored their empathic brain, the level of trust, the level of pleasure, the level of interdependency, the level of cooperation, and the level of transparency goes up exponentially. And in the exponential mathematical expression of that transparency, you have the birth of an environment that is so loving, and there's a very technical definition of love. It's loving enough to care, caring enough to see, seeing enough to understand, understanding enough to empathize, empathizing enough to attune, and attuning enough to succeed, and succeeding enough to facilitate the rapid development of survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, self-actualization and realization of personal talents, abundance and integration of those talents into the rest of the world, and transcendence, being part of something bigger than yourself. When you love enough to help the others in your environment to reach that state of human transcendence, the level of trauma which is produced by the reptilian brain goes down to almost nothing. The level of trauma that remains in the natural environment, earthquakes, etc., are rapidly mitigated through empathy and intelligence with the technologies we already have on the planet today. The sense of divisiveness goes down through the law of empathy, which says that you focus your attention on the people who need the most help in a given moment. And you give birth to the fifth gear in human consciousness, which is transcendence, which is facilitated chemically by the endogenous entheogens that exist in our brains. We have a cocktail of self-producing chemicals, among them DMT, in the brain that release. And shamans have been working with these chemicals for thousands of years with ayahuasca. More recently, the extractions of pure DMT, 5-MeO-DMT. The experiences that our brain are capable of having of unity, of connectedness, these experiences are incredible. And what they lead to is a degree of vision and synergy and interconnected sensitivity that release a possibility field for human well-being that this planet, in terms of our known history, has never seen. We're dealing with a transcendent brain that gives birth to a transcendent generation who identify more with the bigger ecology and species and field of which they are a part, then they identify as the separate, materialistic, dogmatically defined Western ego. Now, we have been killing off the tribes and cultures and languages that already have some sense of transcendence and interconnectedness. I'm sitting on land that 500 years ago was occupied by people who, on a number of metrics, were more intelligent than myself and any of us here. We look at intelligence as the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being, then we have to say that the Native American peoples, compared to the average American, had higher levels of felt well-being per unit of energy expended than we do. And we can look at that in terms of the natural resources. You and I are going to put 101 tons of energy into a landfill and call it garbage. The average American produces 102 tons of garbage in the course of their lifetime. We're also going to consume directly and indirectly. A lot of it is indirectly because we use fossil fuels to produce everything we consume and transport it. So we're going to put 90,000 gallons of gasoline into the atmosphere. We're going to put 1,500 metric tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. 90,000 gallons of gas, 102 tons, 1,500 metric tons of CO2 in the atmosphere for one 200-pound unit. Now, are we experiencing 10 times more human well-being? Because when a Native American died on this very land, their body went back and replenished the earth, and there was no waste, not a single ton of waste. So we're dealing with more than 1,000 times more waste. So to consume 1,000 times more energy, one ought to have 1,000 times more human well-being. In fact, the levels of depression are higher in America than they are or were 500 years ago. The levels of apathy and meaninglessness are higher today than they were then. So we're consuming 1,000 times more energy to have more mental, emotional disease, the obesity levels, the levels of mediocrity, and the separateness from what is transcendent. We have spent 1,000 times more energy to deteriorate in key domains of the feminine psyche, the felt human experience. Now, what have we gained from that? Fast iPads, thousands of friends, none of whom would show up at a funeral or sit down for a 4-hour peace pipe ceremony and really talk. What have we gained? We've gained the promise. We've not gained happiness, we've gained the promise of happiness, that if we consume enough and buy the latest iPhone and do this and do that, then we will be happy. We've got the promise. But the promise is a lie. The promise was a lie. Unlimited consumption is an illusion. It doesn't work. It never did. But it made sense. At the beginning of a pyramid scheme, everything makes sense. It's the majority of people who get ripped off at the last bit of the pyramid scheme that makes pyramid schemes so destructive. The first people in the pyramid scheme, the first people in the American dream get paid off. But it's not sustainable, which means it's a pyramid scheme that collapses and hurts the most number of people. And that's when, of course, you wake up and stop buying into the scam. And, of course, the smart money gets out early and doesn't tell everyone else, which facilitates this sociopathic paradigm of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, which always leads to violence, by the way. If there's no leadership amongst the sociopathic billionaires who are moving this around, then the pain levels and the discrepancy gets to a point where there is civil war and violence. It's just how it works. You violate the principle of leadership to a certain extent, and you produce a generation, a majority of people in a reptilian state who understand finally that they're never going to get whatever it is that was promised. And they've been lied to. And they're in pain. And they're the majority. And they will come for the minority if the minority is not smart enough to transition into the Michaelian frame of leaders eat last. Let us help the people who need help the most.